Red and blue lights washed across the deserted suburban road, briefly hiding the quiet dignity of the man behind the wheel of the silver sedan. Officer Colton Rourke leaned against the driver's window, a cruel smirk playing on his lips as he tapped his heavy flashlight against the glass. "Out here, buddy. I don't care what your little plastic card says." Rourke sneered, his posture swollen with arrogant authority. "I'm the law here." The older black man simply adjusted his glasses, and when he answered, his voice was dangerously calm. "No, officer," he replied softly. "I am the law, and your career is finished." The air over Westlake was crisp, the kind of late autumn chill that kept the affluent suburban streets completely barren late at night. Darius Whitcomb loved this quiet. At 58 years old, he was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders throughout each workday, issuing rulings that altered the course of massive corporations, organized crime syndicates, and corrupt public officials. But tonight, he wasn't wearing his heavy black robes. He was just a father wearing a faded gray college sweatshirt and soft denim jeans. He was driving his meticulously maintained late-model Mercedes E-Class back home after helping his pregnant daughter assemble a crib. Darius drove with the same precision he brought to every part of his life. Both hands rested on the wheel at 10 and 2, and the speedometer remained at the posted limit. He was listening to a low-volume jazz broadcast, his mind already drifting toward the warm bed and the cup of chamomile tea waiting for him at home. He did not notice the cruiser tucked behind the thick oak trees near the intersection of Elm and Prescott. Inside that cruiser sat Officer Colton Rourke, a 7-year veteran of the Westlake Police Department, whose personnel file was as thick as a phone book, brimming with excessive force complaints and racial profiling accusations that had repeatedly disappeared after intervention from a highly cooperative police union. Beside him was Officer Miles Avery, a rookie only 6 months out of the academy, still idealistic enough to feel his stomach tighten whenever Rourke decided to go looking for someone to stop. "Look at this guy," Rourke muttered, his eyes narrowing as Darius's silver Mercedes glided past the intersection. Driving through a neighborhood like this late at night, in a car like that. "He was doing the limit, Colton," Avery said hesitantly, his eyes on the radar gun, which read the posted limit. "Plates are clean. Registration is current." He touched his brakes too sharply. Rourke lied effortlessly, throwing the cruiser into drive. Suspicious driving. Maybe he is watching the houses, or maybe the car is not his. Let's light him up. Before Avery could protest, the deafening wail of the siren shattered the suburban silence, and the cruiser's light bar exploded into a blinding strobe of red and blue. Darius saw the lights in his rearview mirror and sighed softly. He didn't panic. He had been a black man in America long before he was ever appointed to the federal bench by the President of the United States. He knew the drill. He engaged his right turn signal, pulled smoothly over to the shoulder beneath a flickering streetlight, shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. He placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel, his fingers clearly visible in the ambient light. The crunch of heavy boots on the gravel shoulder announced Rourke's approach. The officer didn't walk. He swaggered. His right hand was already resting casually on the butt of his service weapon, an intimidation tactic Darius recognized instantly. Avery hung back near the rear quarter panel of the Mercedes, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Rourke stopped at this window, shining his high-beam tactical flashlight directly into Darius's eyes. "Good evening," Darius said, his voice even and controlled. "Is there a problem, officer? License, registration, and proof of insurance." "Now," Rourke barked, deliberately ignoring Darius's question. "I have my wallet in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment," Darius stated calmly, turning his head slightly to avoid the blinding beam of the flashlight. "I'm going to reach for them now. Is that acceptable?" "Stop talking and hand it over," Rourke snapped. Moving slowly and deliberately, Darius retrieved his leather wallet. He pulled out his driver's license and his insurance card, handing them through the window. He did not pull out his federal identification credentials. He had always believed in facing the world as a citizen first, never using his badge to skirt the law. If he had committed a traffic infraction, he would pay the ticket. Rourke snatched the cards from Darius's fingers. He shined the light on the license, then back at Darius's face. "Darius Whitcomb, you're a long way from home, Darius. What are you doing in Westlake?" "I was visiting my daughter," Darius replied. "And I believe I asked you why I was pulled over." Rourke leaned in closer, bringing his face inches from the window. Darius could smell stale coffee and peppermint gum. "You swerved, Darius. You crossed the double yellow line. You look intoxicated to me." "Have you been drinking?" "I haven't had a drop of alcohol in 15 years, Darius said, his tone dropping an octave, taking on the resonant, commanding timbre he used in his courtroom. "And my vehicle possesses lane assist technology. It is physically impossible for me to have crossed the double yellow line without an audible alarm sounding, which did not happen. You have made a pretextual stop without reasonable suspicion." Rourke's jaw tightened. I wasn't used to people using legal terminology on the side of a dark road. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. Darius's refusal to show fear infuriated him. "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here," Rourke mocked, looking back at Avery and laughing harshly. "Step out of the vehicle, Darius." "Under what legal authority?" Darius asked, his grip on the steering wheel remaining loose but firm. "You have my identification. If you intend to issue a citation for a traffic violation, please write it. Otherwise, I am free to go." "I said step out of the damn car," Rourke roared, his hand leaving his gun and grabbing the handle of Darius's door. Finding it locked, he slammed his fist violently against the roof of the Mercedes. "Unlock this door right now, or I'm smashing the window and dragging you out. You are interfering with a lawful investigation." Darius took a slow, deep breath. He knew the law. He knew Pennsylvania versus Mims gave officers the right to order a driver out of the vehicle. To resist physically would only give this unstable officer the excuse he was clearly begging for. "I am complying," Darius said, pressing the unlock button. "But I want to state for the record that I am doing so under duress, and I am not consenting to any searches of my person or my vehicle. I don't care about your consent," Rourke sneered as he yanked the door open. The moment Darius's feet touched the pavement, Rourke grabbed him roughly by the shoulder of his sweatshirt and spun him around, slamming his chest against the side of the Mercedes. The metal was cold against Darius's cheek. Out of the corner of his eye, Darius saw Rookie Officer Avery take a panicked step forward. "Colton, hey, take it easy," Avery stammered. "He's complying." "Shut up, Miles. I handle my stops my way." Rourke barked. He kicked Darius's legs apart, far wider than necessary, nearly causing the older man to lose his balance. Rourke's hands aggressively patted down Darius's pockets. "Got any weapons on you, Darius? Any needles that are going to poke me?" "I am unarmed," Darius said, his voice muffled against the car as the indignity of the moment pressed against him, but his mind remained entirely analytical. He was cataloging every Fourth Amendment violation, every breach of departmental protocol, every civil rights infraction. He was building a case. Rourke's hands found the leather wallet Darius had placed back in his pocket. Without asking permission, Rourke pulled it out and tossed it onto the trunk of the car. Then, with violent swiftness, Rourke grabbed Darius's wrists, wrenched them behind his back, and clamped heavy steel handcuffs onto them. He squeezed the cuffs shut tightly, the metal biting painfully into Darius's skin. "Officer Rourke," Darius said clearly, having read the name tag during the initial approach. "I am officially advising you that these cuffs are too tight and are causing injury. Furthermore, you have placed me under arrest without reading me my Miranda rights, nor have you established probable cause for this detainment." Rourke let out a barking laugh. "You watch too much television, old man. You're not under arrest. You're being detained for officer safety because you're acting aggressively." "I have not moved a muscle," Darius noted calmly. "Stay facing the car," Rourke ordered. He walked back to the trunk and flipped open Darius's wallet. "Let's see who we're really dealing with here. Probably got a warrant out of Chicago." Avery walked up beside Rourke, his face pale in the flashing police lights. He looked from the handcuffed man leaning against the car to the wallet in Rourke's hands. Rourke thumbed through the credit cards, ignoring the cash. Let's see here. Country club card. Pretentious. What's this? Rourke's thick fingers paused. Behind a leather flap, normally kept hidden from casual view, was a heavy gold-plated shield. Next to it was a laminated identification card bearing the seal of the United States government. Avery leaned in to get a better look. The young rookie's eyes widened with shock. He read the heavy black lettering on the credential. United States District Court. Darius Whitcomb, Chief Judge of the Federal District. The color drained from Avery's face as dizziness swept through him. He looked at the quiet man in the faded sweatshirt leaning against the car. Then he looked at Rourke. Colton, Avery whispered, his voice trembling violently. Colton, look at the badge. Rourke scoffed, though a flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes. He pulled the badge holder out into the light. He stared at the words, Chief Judge. He stared at the federal seal for several terrifying seconds. The roadside fell silent, except for the steady clicking of the cruiser's warning lights. Then, denial took control. Rourke's ego, inflated by years of unchecked power in his small suburban department, simply refused to process the reality of what he was holding. He could not accept that he had assaulted and illegally detained a federal judge, so he rejected the evidence in front of him. It's a fake, Rourke declared, his voice louder than necessary, trying to convince himself. You can buy this garbage on the internet for $50. Guys buy them to try and get out of speeding tickets. Colton, look at the holographic seal, Avery pleaded, his voice cracking. That's not a fake. Look at the watermarks. Oh my God, Colton, take the cuffs off him. Take them off right now. Shut up, Miles, Rourke snapped, his face turning red as he stomped over to Darius, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around to face the street. Rourke shoved the federal identification directly into Darius's face. Where do you get this, huh? You think flashing a fake tin makes you special? Impersonating a federal officer is a felony, you idiot. Darius stood tall. Despite his hands being bound behind his back, the night air was cold, but his dark eyes burned with an intense, unyielding fire. He looked directly into Rourke's soul, stripping away the uniform, the gun, and the badge, seeing only a frightened, pathetic bully. I am not impersonating anyone, Darius said. His voice was no longer just calm. It was the voice of a man who commanded courtrooms, who handed down life sentences, who held the power of the United States Constitution in his pen. I am Chief Judge Darius Whitcomb of the United States District Court. I was appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and I have federal jurisdiction over this entire state. You have engaged in an illegal traffic stop. You have assaulted me. You have violated my civil rights. And you have illegally seized my property. Darius paused, letting the silence hang before delivering the final blow. I am giving you one chance, Officer Rourke. Remove these cuffs, return my property, and give me your badge number. If you do, I will ensure your prosecution is handled fairly. Rourke's judgment collapsed under the pressure. The sheer authority radiating from Darius was terrifying, but Rourke was too far gone. If he backed down now, he was admitting defeat. He pushed his chest out, leaning in close to Darius. Out here, buddy. I don't care what your little plastic card says. Rourke sneered, pointing a finger into Darius's chest. I'm the law here. You're under arrest for impersonating a federal official, resisting arrest, and driving under the influence. No, officer, Darius replied softly, his face an unreadable mask of iron. I am the law, and your career is finished. Get in the damn car. Rourke shoved Darius roughly toward the back of the cruiser. He forced the older man down into the hard plastic seat, slamming the door shut with a heavy thud. Avery stood frozen on the street, staring at the silver Mercedes. He felt like he was watching a train completely derail in slow motion, and he was strapped to the front engine. Colton, Avery whispered as Rourke walked past him. You just ended our lives. Get in the car, Miles. Rourke growled, though a cold sweat had broken out on the back of his neck. He's a fake. You'll see. He's just a loud mouth with a fake badge. We're taking him to the station." The Westlake Police Department was a modern brick-faced building nestled next to the town hall. Later that night, the precinct was nearly silent. Only a few officers were completing paperwork. A janitor moved a floor buffer through the hallway, while Sergeant Warren Dempsey staffed the front desk and waited for the end of his shift. The double glass doors violently swung open, letting in a gust of cold autumn air. Officer Rourke marched in, his hand firmly gripping Darius's bicep, practically dragging him toward the booking desk. Officer Avery trailed behind them, walking like a man marching to his own execution. "Hey, Sarge," Rourke called out, his voice loud and artificially cheerful. "Got a live one for you." Resisting suspected driving under the influence. And wait till you see this, impersonating a federal officer. Sergeant Dempsey, a 20-year veteran with a receding hairline and a gut that tested the limits of his uniform buttons, looked up from his computer monitor. He pushed his reading glasses down his nose and looked at the prisoner. Darius Whitcomb stood quietly at the booking desk. His sweatshirt was bunched up, his wrists still tightly cuffed behind his back. Despite his disheveled appearance, his posture was immaculate. He did not look at the floor. He looked directly at the sergeant. Impersonating. Dempsey grunted, standing up and walking over to the counter. What did he do? Flash a fake Federal Bureau of Investigation badge to get out of a ticket? Better. Rourke smirked, slamming Darius's wallet down onto the heavy counter. He's claiming he's a federal judge. Chief judge, no less. He had the badge and everything. Dempsey chuckled dryly. He reached out and picked up the wallet. Well, that's a new one. Usually they just say they know the mayor. Dempsey flipped the wallet open. He looked at the gold shield. He looked at the federal identification card. The silence in the precinct lobby was sudden and absolute. Sergeant Dempsey had been around a long time. He had handled federal transfers. He had been to the federal courthouse in the city. He knew what a real credential looked like. He knew the specific microprinting on the edges. He knew the holographic seal of the Department of Justice. His eyes slowly rose from the identification card to the man standing in handcuffs. He recognized him. He had seen Darius Whitcomb on the evening news just several months earlier, giving a press conference after handing down a massive racketeering conviction. The color drained from Sergeant Dempsey's face so rapidly that Avery thought the older man might actually have a heart attack. The sergeant's hand began to shake, the heavy leather wallet trembling against the countertop. "Sarge?" Rourke asked, his smug smile faltering slightly as he noticed the sergeant's reaction. "It's a good fake, right? Fooled Miles out there, too." Dempsey didn't look at Rourke. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the chief judge of the federal district, who was currently bleeding slightly from where the steel cuffs had cut into his wrists. "Judge Whitcomb," Dempsey whispered, his voice cracking. It was barely audible. "Good evening, Sergeant," Darius replied, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I would shake your hand, but as you can see, I am somewhat indisposed." "Oh my God," Dempsey breathed. He scrambled around the desk, his keys already jingling in his hand. He practically shoved Rourke out of the way. "Judge, I am so Jesus Christ. Turn around, sir. Let me get these off you." "Hey, whoa," Rourke protested, stepping forward. "Sarge, what are you doing? He's my prisoner." "The badge is a fake," Rourke protested. "Shut your mouth, Rourke," Dempsey roared, a vein bulging in his forehead. He unlocked the cuffs with trembling hands. The steel clicked open, and Darius slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing the deep, angry red indentations on his wrists. "Sergeant, he is a fraud," Rourke began. "I said, shut up," Dempsey screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling finger at Rourke. "Do you have any idea who this is? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Rourke blinked, looking from Dempsey to Darius, the terrifying reality finally beginning to breach the thick walls of his arrogance. He swerved. Rourke stammered, his bravado rapidly deflating. Darius adjusted his sweatshirt, then looked at his bleeding wrists. He looked up at Sergeant Dempsey. "Sergeant," Darius said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I require 3 things immediately. First, I want the name and badge number of this officer and his partner. Second, I want my personal effects returned to me. And third, I want you to wake up your chief of police and tell him to get down here. Yes, Your Honor. Right away, Your Honor, Dempsey stammered, rushing back behind the desk. He grabbed a first aid kit and pushed it across the counter. Sir, please sit down. Let me get you some water. I am so terribly sorry about this. The apology is noted, Sergeant. But it is not yours to make, Darius said. He turned to look at Rourke. Rourke had backed up against the wall. His face was the color of chalk. The adrenaline that had fueled his ego on the side of the road had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. He looked at Avery, who was standing by the door with his hands covering his face, quietly weeping. You're really a judge, Rourke whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Darius didn't answer him directly. He walked over to the wooden bench in the holding area and sat down gracefully, crossing his legs. He looked at Rourke with the exact same expression he used when sentencing men to federal penitentiaries. Sergeant, Darius called out, his eyes never leaving Rourke. Before you call your chief, I need to make a phone call. Of course, Your Honor, Dempsey said, desperately dialing the chief's home number. Do you need me to call an attorney for you? I don't need an attorney, Sergeant, Darius said, his voice cold as ice. I need the special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office, because as of this moment, your precinct is under federal investigation. The precinct lobby seemed to lose all its air as the magnitude of the catastrophic error settled over everyone inside. Darius Whitcomb dialed a number on his cell phone, returned to him promptly by a trembling Sergeant Dempsey, and held it to his ear. The silence in the room was so absolute that Rourke could faintly hear the ringing from the earpiece. Rowan, Darius said, his voice dropping into a professional clipped cadence. It's Darius Whitcomb. I need you to mobilize a civil rights response team to the Westlake Police Department. Yes, right now I have just been the victim of an illegal detention, assault, and false arrest under color of law by an officer, Colton Rourke. Secure the premises, Rowan. I want all dashcam footage, body cam footage, and dispatch audio preserved before anyone in this building has a chance to hit the delete key. Darius paused, listening to the voice on the other end. I am uninjured, save for some lacerations on my wrists. Just get your people here. He ended the call and placed the phone carefully on his lap. He did not look at Rourke. He didn't need to. The officer was visibly disintegrating against the cinderblock wall. Soon afterward, the screech of tires outside signaled the arrival of Chief Graham Dorsey. The chief of the Westlake Police Department burst through the double doors, looking as though he had aged a decade during the short drive from his home. He was wearing hastily pulled-on uniform trousers and a civilian windbreaker zipped up to his chin, his thinning gray hair sticking up in erratic tufts. Dorsey's eyes frantically scanned the lobby, skipping past his desk sergeant and the 2 patrolmen, landing immediately on the dignified black man sitting on the holding bench. Judge Whitcomb. Chief Dorsey gasped, practically sprinting across the linoleum floor. He stopped a few feet away, his hands hovering awkwardly as if he wanted to offer a handshake, but knew he had absolutely no right to do so. Your Honor, I cannot begin to express the depths of my horror. I was awakened by Sergeant Dempsey, and I drove straight here. Are you okay? Do you need a paramedic? I am fine, Chief Dorsey, Darius replied, his tone polite, but entirely devoid of warmth, though I cannot say the same for the constitutional integrity of your department. Dorsey swallowed hard, his face flushing a deep mottled red. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Rourke. The panic in the chief's face was instantly replaced by a volcanic rage. Rourke. Dorsey growled, his voice vibrating with suppressed fury. What in the name of God have you done? Rourke pushed himself off the wall, his survival instincts kicking in. He fell back on the only defense he knew, the culture of silence and the habitual twisting of facts. Chief, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. He was driving erratically. He crossed the double yellow on Elm. When I pulled him over, he was belligerent. He refused lawful orders to exit the vehicle. He resisted being cuffed, and he was acting aggressively. I had no idea who he was. He just flashed a badge, and I thought it was a fake. You know how many fakes we get around here. Chief Dorsey looked back at Darius. The judge simply sat there, watching Rourke's desperate performance with the detached interest of an entomologist observing a dying insect. "Is that true, Your Honor?" Dorsey asked, his voice trembling. "Chief Dorsey," Darius said smoothly, "my vehicle is equipped with lane-keeping assist and a digital telemetry recorder. It will mathematically prove I never deviated from the center of my lane. I complied with every physical command given to me, despite the stop being entirely pretextual. I was dragged from my vehicle and assaulted." Darius's eyes shifted slightly to the young rookie standing in the corner. "But you do not need to take my word for it. You have a witness, Officer Avery." Every eye in the room snapped to the young rookie. Avery flinched as if he had been struck. He looked at Rourke, whose eyes were wide, silently pleading, silently threatening. "Stick to the story. Back me up. You're a cop. I'm a cop." Avery looked at his training officer, the man who had taught him how to falsify probable cause, how to target minorities passing through their affluent town, how to be a bully with a badge. Then he looked at the federal judge, a man radiating absolute, unshakable integrity. "Miles," Rourke said, his voice carrying a dark, desperate edge, "tell the chief what happened. Tell him how erratic the suspect was acting." Avery took a deep breath. The tears that had been welling in his eyes spilled over, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was surprisingly steady. "He was driving exactly at the speed limit, Chief," Avery said. "Miles, shut up!" Rourke yelled, taking a step toward the rookie. "Stand down, Rourke!" Chief Dorsey roared, putting his hand on his own service weapon. "Go on, Avery." "The judge was driving at the speed limit," Avery continued, his words spilling out in a rapid, cathartic confession. "He didn't cross the yellow line. Colton just saw a black man driving a late-model Mercedes in a rich neighborhood and decided he wanted to mess with him. The judge was completely polite. He handed over his identification. Colton ripped him out of the car, slammed him against the door, and cuffed him for no reason. When the judge showed his federal identification, Colton called it a fake and threw him in the back of the cruiser. I told him to stop, Chief. I swear to God, I told him to look at the badge. He wouldn't listen." Rourke lunged. "You little rat!" he screamed. He didn't make it 2 steps. Sergeant Dempsey had already cleared the booking desk and tackled Rourke from the side, slamming the heavy-set officer face first into the linoleum floor. Chief Dorsey was on him a second later, planting his knee firmly into the small of Rourke's back. "Don't you move! Don't you twitch!" Dorsey bellowed. He reached down, pulled Rourke's service weapon from its holster, and sent it sliding safely across the floor. He then ripped the radio and the badge from Rourke's uniform shirt. "Colton Rourke, you are stripped of your police powers, effective immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending a criminal investigation." "You can't do this," Rourke shouted into the floor. His cheeks squished against the cold tile. "The union will have my job back by Monday." He was resisting. "It's my word against his." "Actually, it isn't." A new booming voice echoed from the front doors. Everyone froze. Standing in the entryway, flanked by 4 men and 2 women wearing tactical vests, marked with the bright yellow letters Federal Bureau of Investigation, was Special Agent in Charge Rowan Mercer. He was a towering, broad-shouldered man with a closely cropped military haircut and eyes like shattered glass. "It's not your word against his, Mr. Rourke," Mercer said, stepping into the precinct. "Because the Federal Bureau of Investigation has already pulled the secure cloud footage from your cruiser's dash cam. We watched the whole thing on the drive over. The footage leaves no doubt, and you are facing federal prison." The arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation transformed the Westlake Police Precinct from a local stronghold into a federal crime scene in a matter of seconds. Agents fanned out with practiced, terrifying efficiency. Two agents immediately stepped behind the booking desk, gently but firmly moving Sergeant Dempsey aside to secure the computer terminals and hard drives. Another agent moved towards the server room to lock down all digital communications, emails, and dispatch logs. Special Agent in charge, Rowan Mercer, walked straight toward Darius Whitcomb. The towering Federal Bureau of Investigation agent stopped in front of the seated judge and offered his hand. "Darius, good to see you. Though I wish it were under better circumstances," Mercer said, his voice softening with genuine respect. "Rowan," Darius replied, accepting the handshake and finally standing up. "Your response time is commendable. When a chief judge calls and says he's been abducted by a local badge, we tend to break the speed limit," Mercer said, his eyes dropping to the angry red welts and dried blood on Darius's wrists. Mercer's jaw muscle twitched. He turned his gaze toward Rourke, who was now being hauled to his feet by Chief Dorsey and a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. Rourke looked completely broken. The swagger, the sneer, the arrogant presumption of absolute authority. It had all been violently stripped away, leaving behind a terrified, trembling man who finally understood the catastrophic scale of his mistake. "Agent Mercer," Chief Dorsey said, his voice shaky, "I want to assure you, the Westlake Police Department will cooperate fully. This officer went rogue. This is not how we operate." Mercer looked down at the chief. "We'll see about that, Chief Dorsey, because my agents aren't just here for tonight's footage. We are executing a federal preservation order on every personnel file, use of force report, and citizen complaint this department has filed in the past decade." Dorsey blanched. "A decade, sir, with respect. This is an isolated incident." "It is never an isolated incident." Darius Whitcomb's voice cut through the room, silencing the chief. The judge stepped forward, his presence commanding the space entirely. He looked at Rourke, then at the chief. A police officer does not wake up one morning after several years on the job and suddenly decide to violently assault a compliant motorist and ignore a federal credential. This level of brazen corruption is practiced. It is normalized. It is tolerated by a system that looks the other way. Darius walked slowly toward Rourke. The disgraced cop couldn't meet his eyes, staring instead at the tips of Darius's shoes. "You told me on the side of the road that you were the law," Darius said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a thunderclap. "You relied on the darkness, your badge, and my skin color to act as a tyrant. You assumed I was a man without a voice. How many others, Mr. Rourke? How many other men and women have you dragged out of their cars in the dark? How many lives have you ruined because they didn't have a gold shield in their wallet to stop you?" Rourke trembled, a solitary tear cutting a path down his sweaty cheek. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "Yes, you did," Darius agreed softly. "But your mistake was not pulling me over. Your mistake was believing that the badge you wore made you unaccountable to the Constitution you swore to protect." Darius turned to Mercer. "Rowan, what are the preliminary charges?" "Deprivation of rights under color of law. A direct violation of 18 United States Code Section 242, Mercer recited smoothly. "False imprisonment, assault, and we'll be looking into adding falsifying official records and evidence tampering depending on what we find in his patrol car." Mercer gestured to his agents. "Cuff him." Agent Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy federal-issue handcuffs from her belt. "Colton Rourke, put your hands behind your back." Rourke complied numbly. The sharp click-click of the ratcheting steel echoed off the cinder-block walls, a sound he had inflicted on countless others, now sealing his own fate. "Wait," Rourke choked out as Jenkins tightened the cuffs. He looked desperately at Darius. "Judge, please. I have a wife. I have 2 little girls. If I go to federal prison, a cop in federal lockup, they'll kill me. Please, Your Honor, have mercy." Darius Whitcomb looked at the weeping man. His expression did not change. There was no malice in his eyes, but there was no pity either. There was only the cold, unyielding scale of justice. "The courtroom is the venue for mercy, Mr. Rourke," Darius said quietly. "Tonight, you face the law." "Take him to the holding cell," Mercer ordered. "He can sit exactly where he planned to put the judge until the federal transport van gets here." Jenkins and another agent marched Rourke across the lobby. The heavy iron bars of the holding cell slid open with a screech of metal. They pushed Rourke inside and slammed the door shut. The loud clang made the consequences feel painfully final. Rourke collapsed onto the wooden bench, buried his face in his restrained hands, and began to sob uncontrollably. Darius watched him for a moment, then turned his attention to Rookie Officer Avery, who was still standing by the door, pale and shivering. "Officer Avery," Darius said. Avery snapped to attention. "Yes, Your Honor." "You did not stop him," Darius said, his voice analytical. "But you did attempt to intervene, and you did not lie when questioned by your superior. In a culture that demands complicity, you chose the truth. Remember that choice. Let it guide the rest of your career, because the moment you forget it, you end up in that cage." "I will, Your Honor." "I promise you," Avery breathed, looking like a man who had just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Darius nodded once. He turned back to the special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "I am going home, Rowan. My tea is cold, and my daughter will be calling me in the morning." "We'll have an agent drive you, Darius," Mercer said gently. "Your car is being brought here by a tow truck. We'll hold it securely overnight so you can pick it up tomorrow." "Thank you," Darius said. He buttoned his faded college sweatshirt, smoothed the wrinkles from his jeans, and walked out the double-glass doors into the cool autumn night, leaving the shattered remains of a culture that had protected abuse for far too long. By the following morning, the story had not merely broken. It had shattered the pristine, manicured illusion of Westlake. The local news affiliates had picked up the police scanner chatter from the night before, and a fleet of satellite trucks was parked outside the brick facade of the Westlake Police Department. Inside his spacious mahogany-paneled chambers at the federal courthouse, Chief Judge Darius Whitcomb sat quietly at his desk, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. He watched the muted television screen on his wall, where a frantic reporter was standing in the morning drizzle, gesturing wildly at the precinct doors. The bold caption across the bottom of the screen read, "Suburban police officer arrests federal judge. Federal Bureau of Investigation raids police headquarters." Darius felt no joy in the spectacle. He felt only a profound sorrow. He knew that for every corrupt officer caught in the blinding light of federal scrutiny, there were countless others operating in the dark, destroying the lives of people who did not possess the armor of a judicial title. The immediate consequences were devastating for the Westlake Police Department. Special Agent Rowan Mercer had not made an empty threat. Later that day, a convoy of dark sport utility vehicles arrived at the precinct. A dozen Federal Bureau of Investigation agents wearing marked jackets marched through the front doors, presenting a sweeping federal warrant that authorized the seizure of every computer server, filing cabinet, and disciplinary record housed in the building. But the institution of corrupt policing rarely surrenders without a vicious fight. Conrad Bishop, the aggressive, red-faced president of the Regional Police Benevolent Association, decided that the only way to save the union's reputation and to protect the lucrative pension fund was to go on the offensive. Bishop hired a high-priced crisis management firm and called an emergency press conference on the steps of the town hall. "What we have here is a gross overreaction by the federal government." Bishop bellowed into a cluster of microphones, his jaw set in aggressive defiance. "Officer Colton Rourke is a decorated officer with 7 years of service in this department. He made a routine, lawful traffic stop in the dark. The driver was uncooperative and combative," Bishop claimed. When a piece of plastic was flashed in the dark, Officer Rourke reasonably believed it was a counterfeit, a common tactic used by criminals to evade arrest. Instead of complying like an ordinary citizen, Judge Whitcomb used his immense political power to ruin a working-class cop. This is a political witch hunt. The strategy was clear: smear the judge, muddy the waters, and cast Rourke as the working-class victim of an elitist federal system. It was a tactic that might have worked had they been dealing with a normal political scandal, but they were dealing with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and more importantly, they were dealing with the truth. The evidence that destroyed Bishop's smear campaign came from the most unlikely of sources: rookie officer Miles Avery. Following the press conference, Bishop and Westlake's Patrol Lieutenant Victor Sloan pulled Avery into an unmarked car behind a local diner. They spent a long stretch of time, heavily implying that if Avery did not amend his official statement to reflect that Judge Whitcomb had been aggressively resisting arrest, Avery's career in law enforcement would be over, and his physical safety on the streets could no longer be guaranteed by his fellow officers. "You back the blue, Miles, or the blue turns its back on you," Bishop had growled, jabbing a thick finger into Avery's chest. "You say the judge swung his elbow at Colton. You say you saw it. Do we understand each other?" Avery had nodded, trembling. He agreed to change his statement. What Bishop and Lieutenant Sloan did not know was that prior to arriving at the diner, Avery had spent several hours sitting in an interrogation room with Special Agent Mercer. Driven by the memory of the dignified judge standing in the precinct, reminding him to choose the truth, Avery had voluntarily allowed the Federal Bureau of Investigation to tape a concealed recording device to his chest. By the day after Bishop's defiant press conference, the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed simultaneous arrest warrants. Lieutenant Sloan was arrested in his driveway while taking out the trash. Conrad Bishop was placed in handcuffs in the middle of a crowded steakhouse. Both men were charged with witness tampering, extortion, and obstruction of a federal civil rights investigation. When the audio of Bishop threatening Avery was leaked to the regional newspapers, the culture of silence in Westlake didn't just crack, it collapsed completely. Facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for the cover-up, Lieutenant Sloan broke immediately. In exchange for a plea deal, Sloan handed over a hidden ledger he kept in a personal safe. The ledger detailed years of coordinated, racially motivated traffic stops designed to seize cash and property under civil asset forfeiture laws. The record showed that Officer Rourke had been deeply involved in those schemes. Rourke's defense attorney, a slick criminal lawyer named Adrian Pike, visited his client in the federal holding facility. Rourke was no longer the arrogant bully who had swaggered down the highway. His hair was greasy, his eyes were sunken with dark bags, and he had lost 15 pounds. Pike slid the plea offer across the steel table. "It's over, Colton. The union president is indicted. Your lieutenant gave up the forfeiture ledger." Avery wore a wire. "They have the dash cam, the body cam, and the judge's car telemetry. If we go to trial, they will annihilate us. You will receive a sentence of 20 to 25 years. Rourke stared at the paper, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it. "What are they offering?" "If you plead guilty to the civil rights violations and false imprisonment and formally admit your role in the forfeiture ring," Pike said grimly, "they'll cap the sentencing recommendation at a decade. But you have to take it now. By tomorrow, the offer rises to 15 years. Rourke closed his eyes, a choked sob escaping his throat. The invincible shield he had worn for several years was gone. He picked up the pen, his tears splashing onto the legal document, and signed the agreement that ended any hope of returning to his former life. Months after the flashing lights had pierced the quiet Westlake night, the sprawling courtroom of the United States District Court in Chicago was packed to its maximum occupancy. Reporters, civil rights advocates, off-duty police officers, and curious citizens filled the wooden pews, the air thick with tense anticipation. Because the victim of the crime was the chief judge of the district, the federal circuit had appointed a visiting judge to preside over the sentencing to ensure absolute impartiality. The Honorable Lenora Whitfield, a notoriously stern jurist from the Southern District of New York, sat high on the bench, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. At the defense table sat Colton Rourke. He was dressed in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy transport chains. The metal restraints clinked loudly against the wooden table every time he shifted his weight. He looked entirely defeated, a hollow shell of the man who had once declared himself the law. Attorney Adrian Pike stood to deliver his final plea for mitigation. "Your Honor," Pike began, his voice solemn, "my client stands before you, a broken man. He has lost his career, his pension, his reputation, and his freedom. He has a wife and 2 young daughters who will now grow up with their father behind bars. Officer Rourke made a terrible and grievous error in judgment that night. He allowed his implicit biases and the toxic culture of his department to cloud his duty. But he is not a monster. He is a flawed human being who has taken responsibility by pleading guilty. We ask the court to consider the statutory minimum of 5 years, allowing him a chance at eventual rehabilitation. Judge Whitfield remained impassive, jotting a note on her legal pad. She looked over the rims of her glasses to the prosecution table. "Does the government wish to speak?" she asked. Special Agent Mercer, sitting in the gallery behind the prosecutors, leaned forward. The lead federal prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the government yields its time to the victim for his impact statement." A hush fell over the massive courtroom. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the chamber swung open, and Darius Whitcomb walked down the center aisle. He was not wearing his judicial robes today. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a deep maroon tie. He walked with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who carried the truth with quiet certainty. Darius approached the wooden podium facing the judge's bench. He adjusted the microphone. He did not look at Rourke. "May it please the court." Darius's voice resonated through the room, deep and commanding, instantly silencing any murmurs from the gallery. "I have spent 3 decades in the pursuit of the law. I have prosecuted cartels and I have sentenced corrupt politicians. I have always believed in the sanctity of the badge and the profound sacred trust we place in the men and women who wear it." Darius paused, resting his hands on the edges of the podium. "But on that autumn night, I was not Chief Judge Whitcomb. I was merely an older black man driving in a neighborhood where Officer Colton Rourke believed I didn't belong. In those terrifying moments on the side of the road, I was violently stripped of my dignity, my rights, and my humanity. I was treated not as a citizen, but as someone without dignity or protection." Darius slowly turned his head, his piercing gaze falling upon the man in the orange jumpsuit. Rourke flinched, shrinking down into his chair, unable to meet the judge's eyes. "Mr. Pike argues that his client made a mistake," Darius continued, turning back to Judge Whitfield. "But cruelty is never a mistake. Cruelty is a choice. Handcuffing a compliant man until he bleeds is a choice. Ignoring a federal credential out of sheer arrogance is a choice. Officer Rourke operated under the profound delusion that the law was a weapon he owned, rather than a master he served." Darius's voice swelled, filling the cavernous space. "I survived that night because I possessed a gold shield and a title that forced the system to correct itself. But, Your Honor, my heart breaks for the thousands of men and women who do not have a federal badge in their wallet. The people who are pulled over in the dark, who are degraded, assaulted, or worse, and whose voices are silenced by a system that blindly protects its own. If this court grants leniency today, it sends a message to every corrupt officer in this country that their uniform is a shield against justice." Darius stood perfectly still. "I ask this court to impose the maximum sentence recommended by the plea agreement, not for vengeance, but to remind every citizen of this nation that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law." Darius stepped away from the podium and walked back up the aisle in total unbroken silence. Judge Whitfield steepled her fingers, looking down at Rourke. The silence stretched for a full, agonizing minute. "Mr. Rourke, please stand," Judge Whitfield commanded. Rourke struggled to his feet, the chains around his ankles clanking loudly, echoing like church bells in the quiet room. "A fundamental foundation of our republic," Judge Whitfield said, her voice dripping with icy condemnation, "is that the state holds a monopoly on violence, and in exchange, the agents of the state are held to the highest possible standard of constitutional conduct. You took an oath to protect the public. Instead, you acted as a predatory tyrant." She picked up a heavy stack of papers, the presentencing report. "You abused your power to terrorize a citizen because of the color of his skin. You acted without realizing that your choices would bring consequences you could not control," she continued. "Your defense claims this was an isolated lapse in judgment. But the federal investigation into your precinct has revealed a staggering pattern of bigotry, theft, and extortion, all of which you willingly participated in. You are a disgrace to the badge, a disgrace to your department, and a danger to the civil liberties of the American people. Judge Whitfield picked up her wooden gavel. Colton Rourke, it is the judgment of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 108 months, equal to 9 years. This sentence is to be served without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, you are barred from ever seeking employment in law enforcement, private security, or public office for the remainder of your natural life. Crack. The gavel struck the sounding block. The sound carried a finality that left no room for denial. Rourke's knees buckled. If it weren't for the 2 federal marshals grabbing him by the armpits, he would have collapsed entirely to the floor. He was sobbing openly now, the devastating reality of his new life washing over him in a suffocating wave. Federal marshals led him out of the courtroom through a side door, his chains rattling all the way into the holding cells below. Months later, the town of Westlake looked largely the same on the surface. The lawns were still perfectly manicured, the oak trees still lined Elm Street, and the suburban quiet still settled over the neighborhoods at night. But beneath the surface, the earth had shifted. Chief Dorsey had been forced into early retirement, in disgrace. The Westlake Police Department was now operating under a strict federal consent decree overseen directly by the Department of Justice. Every cruiser was equipped with tamper-proof cameras. Every officer underwent intensive constitutional training, and a civilian oversight board reviewed every use of force complaint. Miles Avery was no longer a rookie. He had been promoted to a field training officer, tasked with ensuring that the new recruits coming through the academy understood that true courage wasn't about dominating citizens, but about having the moral fortitude to police their own. Months later, on a quiet evening, Darius Whitcomb was driving his Mercedes E-Class back from his daughter's house. His new grandson had just been born, and the judge was exhausted, but deeply happy. He drove with his hands exactly at 10 and 2. The speedometer hovered right at the posted speed limit. As he passed the intersection of Elm and Prescott, he saw a police cruiser parked beneath the heavy oak trees. The cruiser did not pull out. The lights did not flash. Darius drove past it in peace, the quiet jazz playing softly through the speakers. He looked in his rear-view mirror at the fading silhouette of the police car. A faint, satisfied smile touched the corners of his mouth. Accountability had finally reached Westlake, and it was there to stay. The quiet ending of this story carries a lesson far larger than the fall of one officer or the reform of one police department. Colton Rourke did not fail because he stopped a powerful judge. He failed because he believed an ordinary citizen did not deserve patience, dignity, or the protection of the law. Darius Whitcomb's federal title forced the system to respond quickly, but his title was never the source of his rights. Those rights belonged to him the moment he entered the road as a citizen. They would have belonged to him if he had been a teacher, a mechanic, a delivery driver, a retired factory worker, or a father returning from his daughter's home. There is no acceptable person to humiliate. There is no harmless target for prejudice. The danger in saying that Rourke chose the wrong man is that it can sound as though the same behavior would have been acceptable against someone with less influence. It would not have been. The true test of authority is not how someone treats a person who can threaten a career. It is how that authority is used when the other person appears frightened, isolated, or powerless. Respect offered only to people with important titles is not respect. It is fear of consequences. Rourke had many opportunities to choose differently. He could have allowed the Mercedes to continue. He could have accepted the clean registration and ended the stop. He could have listened when Darius calmly explained his movements. He could have checked the federal credential instead of allowing pride to turn evidence into another accusation. At every turning point, he placed his ego above the truth. That is how one wrong decision often becomes a life-changing failure. A person makes a mistake, then feels too proud to admit it. Instead of stepping back, apologizing, and correcting course, that person creates another lie to defend the first one. The cost grows with every choice. Real courage can be as simple as saying, "I was wrong." Those words do not erase harm, but they can prevent harm from spreading. Miles Avery also faced a difficult choice. He knew the stop was unjustified. He saw the force being used. He recognized the credential and tried to warn his training officer, yet fear kept him from acting strongly enough on the roadside. His later honesty mattered. It helped preserve the truth and prevented the department from building a false story around the judge. His decision to cooperate with federal investigators also exposed the people who attempted to pressure him into lying. Still, the story does not pretend that speaking later erased his earlier silence. Accountability can hold both truths at once. Miles failed to stop the abuse, and he later found the courage to tell the truth. A human being can make a harmful choice and still choose a better path afterward. The same principle applies to forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean denying what happened. It does not require a victim to restore trust before trust has been earned. It does not cancel lawful consequences or prevent a person from speaking honestly about the pain. Sometimes forgiveness means refusing to carry another person's cruelty into every future day. It means allowing justice to take its proper course without letting anger reshape the heart. Darius did not celebrate Rourke's fear. He did not use his position to inflict personal revenge. He asked for evidence to be preserved, demanded a lawful investigation, and allowed an independent judge to determine the sentence. His restraint was not weakness. It was the discipline of a man who understood that justice becomes more credible when it is guided by principle rather than rage. The sentence could not return the dignity taken from Darius on the roadside. It could not erase the fear experienced by earlier victims, but it acknowledged the wrongdoing, removed a dangerous officer from public authority, and opened the department to long overdue reform. Accountability is most meaningful when it protects the future as well as answers the past. The changes in Westlake mattered because they reached beyond one prosecution. Cameras could no longer be quietly altered. Civilian complaints received outside review. Officers were trained to understand constitutional limits, and new recruits were taught that controlling a situation did not require degrading the people inside it. Those reforms were not perfect, and they could not guarantee that every officer would make the right choice. No written policy can replace character, but clear rules, transparent evidence, and honest supervision can make it harder for misconduct to hide. Good institutions do not ask the public for blind trust. They earn trust by showing that mistakes will be examined, misconduct will be confronted, and powerful people will be held to the same standards as everyone else. This lesson reaches far beyond law enforcement. Every person holds some form of power. A supervisor influences an employee's future. A teacher shapes a student's confidence. A parent controls the emotional safety of a child. A customer can affect the livelihood of a worker who is required to remain polite. Power reveals character most clearly when no one seems able to challenge it. Living kindly does not mean avoiding difficult decisions. It means remembering the humanity of the person affected by those decisions. It means listening before assuming, explaining instead of humiliating, and correcting ourselves when pride begins speaking louder than truth. The badge in Rourke's hands was only metal. The federal credential in Darius's wallet was also only metal and plastic. Neither object created integrity. Integrity came from the choices surrounding them. Rourke used his badge to create fear. Darius used his authority to preserve evidence and protect future citizens. One man treated power as ownership. The other treated it as responsibility. That difference is the heart of the story. When Darius later drove through the same intersection and saw the cruiser remain beneath the oak trees, he did not smile because the police had become afraid to act. He smiled because restraint had returned. A citizen could travel through the neighborhood without being treated as suspicious merely for existing there. The road had become quiet again, but this time the quiet did not hide abuse. It reflected the possibility of trust. Justice is not proven only in crowded courtrooms or dramatic arrests. Sometimes justice appears in an ordinary traffic stop, handled with courtesy. It appears when an officer explains the reason for contact, listens to an answer, and allows a citizen to continue safely. It appears when a colleague refuses to support a lie, even when loyalty and fear make silence easier. Small choices build the culture around us. A single respectful decision may prevent a conflict that no one will ever hear about. A single honest report may protect someone from being falsely accused. A single apology may stop pride from turning one error into a lifetime of regret. The world often celebrates loud demonstrations of strength, but genuine strength is frequently quiet. It is the ability to stay calm when anger would feel satisfying. It is the willingness to tell the truth when dishonesty offers protection. It is the humility to remember that authority exists to serve, not to dominate. No one is above the law, but no one is beneath its protection either. That second truth is just as important. The law should not become more careful only when the person behind the wheel carries a federal title. Dignity should never depend on wealth, profession, race, neighborhood, or personal connections. Every person deserves to be seen clearly before being judged. The truth eventually reached the light in Westlake because several people made difficult choices. Darius refused to be provoked. Warren Dempsey recognized the credential and acted. Miles Avery rejected the false story. Rowan Mercer preserved the evidence. An independent court imposed consequences, and the community demanded lasting reform. None of them repaired the system alone. Change happened because courage passed from one person to another. That is a hopeful lesson. We may not control every institution, but we can control the honesty of our next choice. We can refuse to join cruelty. We can question an assumption. We can listen to a person whose experience is different from our own. We can use whatever authority we hold with care. The consequences of living carelessly can be severe, but the effects of living decently can travel just as far. Darius returned to his family, met his newborn grandson, and continued serving the law without allowing one officer's actions to define his view of every person wearing a uniform. Miles built his career around teaching new officers the lesson he had learned at great cost. The department began earning back trust through daily conduct rather than public promises. That is how healing usually begins. Not with the claim that the past no longer matters, but with an honest acknowledgement of what happened and a commitment to choose differently. If this dramatic story of justice, responsibility, and courage stayed with you, support the channel by liking the video and sharing it with someone who believes power should always be guided by integrity. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories about hidden strength, accountability, and the moments when truth finally reaches the light. And leave a thoughtful comment. Which choice in this story do you believe mattered most? Until the next story, remember that true justice is not defined by the badge someone wears. It is revealed by the dignity that person protects, the truth that person is willing to face, and the kindness that remains even when accountability is necessary.